Welcome to the MI Mental podcast, where we explore the intricate and often contentious world of mental health, ethics, and the law. This is the Doctors in Court edition, where we dive deep into real-life cases in which medical professionals find themselves defending their actions in court. I'm your host, Sabine Fonderson, and today we're tackling a case that raises critical questions about professional judgment, patient privacy, and the fine line between perceived threats and real danger. We'll explore the timeline of events, break down the psychiatrist's defense, and scrutinize the disciplinary board's decision. As always, I'll explain any complicated medical terms to make sure everyone's on the same page. And don't forget to stick around until the end, where I'll pose 2 key questions for you to ponder and then share my thoughts on them. This case involves a psychiatrist referred to as the psychiatrist and a complaint filed by her patient. The crux of the case centers around an email the patient sent to the psychiatrist, which she perceived as threatening. This led to the psychiatrist, also the defendant, breaking patient confidentiality by reporting the patient to the police, fearing a potential violent incident. To provide some context, the patient had been undergoing a psychiatric evaluation under the psychiatrist's care. During their interactions, the psychiatrist grew concerned about the patient's mental state, particularly after receiving an email from him that referenced a recent tragic event involving a shooter who had a similar background to the patient. The email sent on July 12, 2011 referenced news articles about a shooting incident involving a member of a gun club, a detail that resonated strongly with the psychiatrist, given that the patient was also a member of a similar club. Given the content and timing of the email and her knowledge of her patient's psychiatric state, the psychiatrist decided to consult her colleagues and ultimately reported the patient to the police, leading to the seizures of the patient's firearms and a subsequent investigation. Let's break down the key events that led to this case reaching the disciplinary board. March 8, 2011. The psychiatrist first meets with the patient for a psychiatric evaluation requested by a third party. During this initial meeting, the psychiatrist assesses the patient's mental health and notes several concerns, including the fact that the patient is a member of a shooting club, which becomes significant later. July 12, 2011. July 12, 2011. The patient sends an email to the psychiatrist referencing 2 news links about a shooter who had recently caused a tragic incident. In the patient's email, it also wished the psychiatrist well on her upcoming maternity leave, and that was interpreted by the psychiatrist as a potential threat. She was particularly alarmed by the comparison between the patient and the shooter that was mentioned in the news. Later that day, the psychiatrist, feeling threatened, consults a physician and the Royal Dutch Medical Association information line for advice. Following these consultations, she decides to report the situation to the police anonymously first, without revealing the patient's identity. In the evening, after assessing the situation, the police request the patient's personal details from the psychiatrist. She complies, providing the police with the patient's name and information about his membership in the shooting club. The next day, the police visits the patient's home and confiscates his firearms. And following this, the psychiatrist also files a formal complaint against the patient, citing the email as a direct threat to her safety. February 12, 2013, the disciplinary hearing takes place, where the patient files a complaint against the psychiatrist, accusing her of breaching confidentiality and reporting inaccurate information to the police. Now let's examine the defense put forward by the psychiatrist. Perceived threat. The psychiatrist's primary defense was that the email she received from the patient was reasonably interpreted as a threat. Given the context, recent media coverage of a mass shooting by a gun club member and patient's own membership in a similar club, the psychiatrist believed that the patient might pose a real danger. She argued that under these circumstances, it was her duty to take preventive action to protect herself and potentially others. Breaking confidentiality. The psychiatrist acknowledged that she broke patient confidentiality by reporting the patient to the police. However, she justified these actions by citing the concept of conflict of duties, where a healthcare provider may breach confidentiality if there is a legitimate fear that maintaining it could result in harm to the public or individuals. She emphasized that this decision was not taken lightly and was made only after consulting with colleagues and seeking advice from the Royal Dutch Medical Association. Accuracy of information. The psychiatrist defended the accuracy of the information she provided to the police, arguing that she only shared details directly relevant to the perceived threat. She did not disclose unnecessary medical details, instead focusing on the patient's membership in the shooting club and the content of the email, which she believed were critical to assessing the threat level. Professional judgment. The psychiatrist maintained that her actions were guided by her professional judgment, which was shaped by the disturbing similarities between the email content and the recent tragic event involving another gun club member. She stressed that her decisions to report her patient was made out of abundance of caution, prioritizing safety over confidentiality. The disciplinary board had the difficult task of balancing the psychiatrist's duty to maintain patient confidentiality against her responsibility to protect public safety. Here's how they approached the case. Number 1. Legal and ethical standards. The board first examined the legal and ethical standards surrounding patient confidentiality, particularly the circumstances under which it can be breached. Now, according to the Dutch law, patient confidentiality is paramount, but it can be overridden in cases of force majeure or when a conflict of duties arises, specifically when there is a risk of significant harm that could be prevented by disclosing confidential information. Number 2, reasonableness of the perceived threat. The board had to determine whether the psychiatrist's interpretation of the email as a threat was reasonable. They considered the content of the email, the context of the shooting incident, and the patient's mental state as perceived by the psychiatrist. The board found that, given the circumstances, the psychiatrist's concern was justified and that she acted reasonably in perceiving the email as a potential threat. Number 3, procedure followed. The board also reviewed the steps the psychiatrist took before breaking confidentiality. They noted that she had consulted with colleagues and sought advice from the Royal Dutch Medical Association before reporting this patient to the police. This consultation process was seen as a reasonable approach to a very difficult situation, demonstrating that the psychiatrist did not act impulsively or without due consideration. Or outcome. Ultimately, the board ruled in favor of the psychiatrist, concluding that her actions were justified given the context. They acknowledged the gravity of breaching patient confidentiality, but agreed that the psychiatrist had acted within her rights and obligations as a healthcare provider under the circumstances. The board also noted that the psychiatrist had provided accurate information to the police and had not exaggerated or fabricated any details, further supporting her decision. The complaint against the psychiatrist was therefore dismissed, and she was cleared of any professional misconduct. Before we move on, let's clarify some of the key terms that were essential to this case. Conflict of duties. This refers to a situation where a professional's obligations to maintain confidentiality is overridden by competing duty, such as the duty to protect others from harm. In this case, the psychiatrist believed that her duty to prevent potential violence justified breaching patient confidentiality. Force majeure. A legal concept that refers to extraordinary circumstances that prevent someone from fulfilling their duties. In medical ethics, it can justify breaking confidentiality if keeping it would result in significant harm. Understanding these terms could help clarify why the psychiatrist's actions while controversial, were ultimately deemed appropriate by the disciplinary board. This case highlights the difficult balance healthcare professionals must strike between respecting patient confidentiality and protecting public safety. The psychiatrist was faced with a challenging situation where she had to make a quick decision under pressure, balancing her ethical obligations with her instinct to prevent potential harm. While the board ultimately supported her decision, this case serves as a reminder of the complexities inherent in mental health care and the weight of responsibility carried by those in the field. Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with 2 questions to think about. Number 1, how should healthcare providers balance patient confidentiality with the need to protect public safety, especially in cases where the threat is not entirely clear? The balance between confidentiality and public safety is delicate and requires careful consideration. Healthcare providers must assess the seriousness of the threat, seek guidance from peers or professional bodies, and document the decision-making process thoroughly. When in doubt, prioritizing safety may be the best course of action, as was the case with the psychiatrist. What steps can healthcare professionals take to ensure they are making the right decision when faced with a potential threat from a patient? Professionals should follow a structured approach, gather all relevant information, consult with colleagues or legal advisors, consider the potential consequences of actions versus inactions, and document every step of the decision-making process. This not only ensures that their actions are defensible, but also that they have acted in the best interest of all parties involved. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the complexities of medical ethics and legal responsibilities in mental health care. If you found this discussion insightful, please share this episode and subscribe for more in-depth explorations on the Am I Mental podcast. Until next time, stay informed and stay safe.